Okay, lecture 9, part 2. It's slightly more dim in here because I turned off the light in hopes that it won't flip our totally weak sauce breaker box. I mean, literally all there is lamp on in this room. That's the only thing this breaker box is dealing with. So if this lamp goes off, who do you call? Call the breaker box manufacturer? Anyway, so where was I? Last thing I remember was Silverback Gorilla on a roller coaster. Um, So that's about the difference between the life that you're living and the life that you were sort of intended to live. It's also sort of like putting a rhinoceros into a concrete cage in a zoo, a concrete enclosure, and then wondering why the rhinoceros gets totally depressed. It's out of its element. It's out of its natural environment, and it was evolved to function well in a certain environment, and then you put it in a contradictory environment and it doesn't do so well. So a lot of mental health problems are just flourishing among college students, and I think that's part why. I mean, it's a naturally chaotic, difficult place that you're in, and it's also completely, just the society you live in is completely unlike the one that you're supposed to, that you're sort of evolved to live in. And then you have all these people who have power over you, your teachers. Um, and they seem most of the time not very helpful. And they don't seem to take students very seriously. That was the impression I had of many of my teachers, that they did not understand that I was a human who had real problems, and they sort of just stuck to the syllabus, and whatever the syllabus said was how the class was going to go. And so I ended up failing 3 classes in college. I still got into all of my top pick grad schools, but I had to say on my applications, look, these 3 classes I failed in one semester, I had a total mental health breakdown. And I said that in my applications. But it worked. People understood, and I got into all my top picks, and I didn't go to any of them because they were too expensive. But um, yeah, so I get it. I get what it's like to be on that side of things. And I also get what it's like to feel really discouraged when you go to your teachers and they don't seem to care very much. Let me read you some quotes that I've collected. Here's one. I've been doing so well ever since I started this medicine my psychiatrist gave me. I only had one bad day in the last 2 weeks, but my depression is so bad right now that I can't stop crying or throwing up. I just want to be dead. Another one. I'm falling off my mental health cliff. I had to wait 3 weeks for a prescription to arrive in the mail. I ran out and haven't slept much in 4 days. My anxiety is through the roof. I don't know how to gain control of my life. I don't see any future where I'm not constantly drowning, emotionally, financially, in my social life. I crawl into my hole for a while when it gets too much, and then when I come back out, I find that I've hurt my friends by being absent and unreliable. I feel like I'm draining the life out of the only person who's ever loved me, and I don't have whatever it takes to give anything back to them. Oh, and I'm getting fatter every day. I completely lost my morning to an emotional breakdown, sobbing, hyperventilating, panic attack. I have so much work to do, but I can't seem to pull myself together. I don't think I have the emotional resilience to do what I do, but that ship has already sailed, and I have nothing valuable to say about anything else. The world is a dumpster fire. My sister lost a custody battle to her abusive ex. My students and my kid and my husband deserve so much better than I can give them right now. I have a seminar in a little bit, and I just want to die or disappear, or anything to avoid facing these people and their judgment and my own crushing ineptitude. I'm racked with anxiety, and I feel like I'm on the verge of a panic attack. I feel like the problem is I lack any of the accomplishments I ought to have, and everyone else is doing so much better. This week, my advisor questioned my enthusiasm. She seemed to think I have no passion for my work. The thing is, because I'm schizophrenic, I have flat affect, and for most of my adult life, people have interpreted me as apathetic. My, my therapist thinks now is a good time to tell my advisor about my diagnosis and explain that I'm just wired to look like I don't care. I was already thinking of telling my advisor because I need someone to carefully um, explain these things to, but I'm afraid of what she'll say. You might have caught one mention in there of students, and that's because these quotes aren't from students, they're from university teachers. I'm part of a mental health group. Um, it's an online forum where we just support each other who are having difficulty, and these are normal people. Some of these people in this group are pretty famous in their fields, but they share their mental health challenges. One of those quotes was from me. Um, so just like on the one hand where faculty often don't see students as real humans with real problems and don't take them seriously, students often don't realize that to the same extent faculty members are often really struggling. That might help explain why sometimes they seem so cold to you. It's because they're going to go back to their house and just try not to break down. I'm telling you that all as a prelude to this one main ethical, practical ethical point that I want to make. And that is that if you're going into the helping professions, your obligation to take care of yourself is about the same as the obligation that parents have when they're in an airplane and oxygen masks fall on. Their obligation is to put the mask on themselves first rather than their child, so that they won't pass out and they can take care of the child. If you put the oxygen mask on your kid first, you're risking passing out, and then in the event that your child needs help in some other way, you won't be there for them. Same thing's true of you. You're in college now. This is a very serious and very difficult time. You need to be aware of that, and you need to be able to take care of yourself. And you have an obligation to. If you really think that if you want your path in life to be one that benefits other people, right now, what you need to, and forever, what you need to always do is to make sure that you're okay first. And not a lot of people are going to say that to you in college, and not a lot of people are going to admit that college is a train wreck of life. It is so hard. It is so much harder than life when you get out of college. Life when you get out of college will be hard too, but in so fewer ways. So the advice I want to give you, the practical advice that I want to give you, I've already made the argument that you have a moral obligation here to take care of yourself, because you won't be able to help anybody else afterwards if you don't. That's the moral argument I made, but I want to give some practical explanation of what that means as a person who's been through college and struggled with these very obligations. The first obligation I want, or the first piece of advice I want to give you, is that if you're struggling at any point and you just feel like it's too much and it's lasting a while, is to go see a psychiatrist and a therapist. I stress those things independently. A psychiatrist and a therapist. Schools have them. They're like accessible to you. I think you get like 10 free visits before they even start billing it to your insurance. So absolutely take advantage of those. I started seeing a psychiatrist about 13 years ago, and I wouldn't be here if I had not done that. Like, I don't know where I'd be or if I'd be here on Earth, but it was like the best thing I've ever done for myself. And I started seeing them in college. the reason I stress psychiatrist and therapist or psychologist independently is because they do two very different things. A psychologist or a therapist is somebody that you can talk to about your life and who will help you bounce your feelings off of and help you process them, and that is extremely helpful. That's something everybody needs in their friends, but it's also nice to have somebody who's completely disconnected from your life that you can do that with. The second thing, the psychiatrist, is something I stress because they can do mental health medication management for you. And that's not something you should be afraid of any more than you should be afraid of taking insulin if you're diabetic. If you're chronically depressed or chronically don't feel good about your life, it's totally reasonable to look for some sort of medical intervention that will help you. I struggled with that problem because I'm a chronic depressive person. I think probably my whole life I've had some degree of serious depression. And for the longest time, I didn't want to take anything because I felt like I didn't want to become dependent on something. Like if that thing ran out, I would be screwed. Or somehow I'm not like really making it through my life if I'm using this thing as a crutch. And so until I was about 24, I guess I was like 22. I didn't ever consider realistically using psychiatric medication. Eventually things got bad enough and I had a persuasive enough doctor who made, I thought, a good argument to me. He said, you're dependent on water, you're dependent on food, you're dependent on your morning coffee not to, to make you feel like you're alive in the morning. You're dependent upon sleep, you're dependent on entertainment if you want to have some like de-stressing in your life. We have all sorts of levels of dependencies. You're dependent on vitamin D and vitamin C if you want to be healthy. Those aren't part of your body. So maybe it's worth considering becoming dependent on something else in order to help your brain do something that it's not very good at doing, because mental illness is just like having a disease in any other organ. Some people's livers don't function exceptionally well and they use a medical intervention for that and they're fine. And even though they're dependent in some sense on that, it doesn't mean that they're like getting through life with a crutch. It means that they've just found the way that they best get through life. So the way I best get through life is every day I take this. These are the medications that help my brain to function in a way that I can get through life and be present and experience some degree of happiness when I should, and not be constantly gripped by anxiety or depression. And I can be pleasant to be around. My friends can rely on me to be there. When if I weren't taking these medications, I would be a very different person and a much worse person, really. I couldn't be dependable to my friends. I couldn't exhibit kindness and presence to them the way that I do because I would be constantly wrestling with my own internal difficulties. These don't make me numb. A good medicine, the right medicine for you won't make you numb if you ever need a medicine. It'll make you feel like you should normally feel, and that's the way this does for me. I take 2 selective serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors called Effexor. I take Wellbutrin, which is a antidepressant. One of these is for a blood pressure issue that I have, and another is for focus because I have ADHD. So I take Adderall. Every day I take these things, and it has changed my life in an extremely positive direction. I could have never finished my PhD if I hadn't gotten help. I probably would not have ever made it out of college if I hadn't gotten help. But it takes a while to get that to find the right balance of therapist and medication therapy. It takes about a year to try medicines and figure out what works and what doesn't, and switch medicines and figure out what works and what doesn't. And you'll go through about 5, 6 different rounds maybe before you land on the medicine that is like, this is what's right for me. And that is a very frustrating process, but it's a lot less frustrating than just not having any help at all. So this isn't for everybody. Obviously, I'm not suggesting every one of my students goes out and gets on some sort of psychiatric med, but if you have for a month or longer struggled with depression or anxiety, or feeling like you're in panic all the time, or feeling like you just can't go out because you just don't feel like it, just makes you nervous, or if you feel like you just want to lie in bed and life sucks and you're not doing any work and you feel bad about yourself, it's one of the worst parts of depression, is feeling bad about yourself. If you have any of those symptoms, and a lot of college students have those symptoms, like enough that I'm taking the whole class and talking about it. If you're having those symptoms, you need to see somebody, and the college has those people, so you should make an appointment. Call the number, look up the number of the counseling center, or whatever they call it here, and call them and say, I'd like to be seen. And they will let you see somebody, and you can just talk to them, and they'll find somebody who's good for you. And if you need help figuring out how to do that anymore, you're welcome to message me, and I'll be whatever help I can to, help you find the people or find the numbers or whatever it is you need. But if you're one of the people who, if you don't feel like you need that level of help, but you just are struggling, and lots of you got to be. I mean, it's college; it's not easy. I have some other recommendations for you. These are things that, like medicine, if I had not learned to do them, I could not have made it through college and grad school. I mean, they're both very difficult to get through. And they're going to sound kind of hokey, and like, well, of course, blah, blah, blah. Somebody's going to say, this or that. But these things really do genuinely have a profound effect on your well-being. And I am glad I learned to take them seriously. So here's Michael Glossen's recommendation for how to have a more healthy life than you currently do. The first recommendation is you need to have a hobby. You need to have something that you do in your life that is completely unrelated to school, that you're never judged for, that you're never graded on, that takes you to a totally different place. Mine are cooking and playing drums and writing. Writing is a little like work stuff because obviously I write as a philosopher, but I like to write fiction and poetry and creative nonfiction. And I like reading novels a lot. But drums and cooking are my jam. Like, those things give me an hour or two at a time where I can just completely zone out of anything else that's going on in my life, and I can be absorbed by this activity, and it's rewarding to me. I get better at it. I can see over time myself getting better and better. It's fun to do while I'm doing it. Cooking is an especially great skill to learn because you'll use it for the rest of your life, and it'll make people like you and think that you're awesome because you can make delicious food that they can put in their mouth. Drums will make your neighbors dislike you, but fuck them, It's my house. Advice number 2. When you're having a difficult time and you need an extension on something in work or in school, don't tell your teacher any specific thing that's going on. Don't tell them you're sick or that you got in a car accident or that your grandmother died or any of that. Tell them that you need to take a mental health day. The reason I say that is you don't need to tell your teachers any of the specifics of your life. You don't owe that to them. And Mental Health Day has a sort of special meaning in academia. It's recognized that mental health is very important, and it's very difficult for a teacher to say no to giving you a mental health day. Some teachers are jerks and will just say no, and in that case, you have to do what you have to do. But my suggestion is it's always better to take care of yourself than to get a good grade, because your GPA simply does not matter nearly as much as you think it does. Your mental health matters way, way more. So if it means getting a B or a C on an assignment in order to just be okay and not sacrifice your well-being and not have more and more stress pile up on you, take the B or the C. You'll be okay. Whether you get a job or not is going to depend a lot more on the connections that you make and the sort of person that you are and what skills you can demonstrate than on your transcript. Your transcript isn't something most job owners just don't care. Advice number 3: don't have sex with people you don't know. That's the cause of a lot of the enormous stress and pain of college life, is figuring out your sex life and accidentally getting intertwined with people who aren't good for you. And the way to avoid that is just to wait until you know a person well enough to know if they're safe for you. If you go home with somebody the first night you meet them, you have no idea who you're going to wake up with or who's going to wake up with you. We all learn that the hard way. But if you make the rule of just waiting just long enough to get to know a person, you can avoid a lot of the people who you would otherwise look back on and regret, because it takes like a month to get somebody out of your life after you've slept with them and decided that they're crazy or just not somebody you want to spend your time with. And after you've been with a person, you sort of owe them like a phone call or some sort of niceness or something, and you don't want to generate obligations to people that you don't know or don't know what their character's like. So if you can follow that rule, it's going to save you a lot of pain. Number 4, carry snacks and water with you. It's amazing how much better you'll feel if you're just hydrated and have a little snack in you every now and then, especially the water thing. I used to think that I had headaches 24 hours a day before. It took like 20 years for me to realize I was just dehydrated all the time. Now I feel way better now. Number 6, when it comes to work, at schoolwork especially, never do an all-nighter, ever. Always do work a little bit at a time. I know it's tempting to be like, I'm just going to knock this whole thing out and be done with it, and then I won't have to worry about it. It's much, much, much better for you mentally and for your work if you just do 30%, do it in thirds or halves, or quarters, depending on the size of the project. Be able to do a little and then stop and do something else. You shouldn't work for more than 2 hours at a time on anything. Like for our journals, you should have in your head an idea for each assignment how long you're willing to put into it. Like for our journals, you should never put more than 30 minutes into a journal. That's the max it should take. And once you get to 30 minutes, you've gotten as much as you should get. And just turn it in, wrap it up and turn it in. When it comes to work, you should sit down and say, I'm going to spend an hour and a half or 2 hours working, or an hour, or half an hour, whatever you want. And do as much as you can and then stop and take a breather and do something else. And then come back to it. Do that a few times a day rather than blocking off your whole evening and making yourself miserable. Your work will be better and you will feel better. And lastly, the last piece of advice is to constantly remind yourself that your well-being is more important than your work. Your well-being is always more important than your work. Your work, especially in college, doesn't matter a ton in the long run. It's going to create a number on an Excel spreadsheet in a computer somewhere, and some people will look at that and use it as part of a calculation that they use to decide whether they're going to give you a job, but they're really not going to weight it very much. And all the other things they experience with you, especially if they met you and had a good conversation with you, are going to totally outweigh anything that they see on your transcript. And you don't need to worry about your teachers being disappointed in you, because I promise, as you've read from or heard from the comments teachers make on that website, they have their own stuff they're dealing with. I do not ever go home and feel like, I just wish that student had done a better job on this. And it's like, I'm not thinking about you, I'm thinking about my own life, and it's hard. So those are my pieces of practical advice for solving a moral obligation, a moral dilemma that you face pretty consistently. And that is, how do you manage all of these different things in order to become the sort of person who can be helpful, morally, positively helpful to others? if you follow some of those principles, if you recognize the problem the way I've laid it out, your life is going to be a lot better. And the upshot to that is you can make other people's lives a lot better if you make your life manageable. If you get to a point where you're okay and you can stay consistently okay, then you can be available to people. If you're not okay, if every day is a struggle that you're not getting a handle on, then you can't be help to many people at all. And you really need to focus on getting yourself right, getting yourself okay, because you matter. You matter as much as any person does. So take what I'm saying seriously. And if you need to find help to get your life in order, to get a grip on things, if you need to take a break from school, if you need to talk to somebody, whatever it is, if you need to start carrying a bottle of water with you everywhere you go, do those things, because you're worth it, and the payoff in the end will be like years of better life, decades of better life if you do these things, and that'll end up in a much greater positive moral impact that you have on people's lives. I know this has been a very self-helpy sort of lecture, but sometimes that's the sort of level you have to talk at if you're asking the question, like, how do I do the most good with my life? And that's what this class is about. It's about, in a biomedical context, doing the most good that you can. But all the principles for how to do as much good as you can in general are going to apply here. So these are some of the principles for that. And they apply just as much to biomedical careers as anyone else. But I think they're maybe some of the most important. So thanks for listening. This has been a very long lecture. This is the only one for the week. Next week, we're going to go back to 2 lectures at a time. 2 lectures per week. But until then, you can journal about the readings for Tuesday, and then you can journal either about this lecture or about the readings on Thursday. One or the other. The last thing I'll say is I have a small, slightly cheesy gift for you, all of you together. And I'm going to post that in the Microsoft Teams thing. A student made a comment in one of the journals that the class had so far dealt with a lot of very negative and slightly depressing content. That's true. There's really no way to talk about a lot of these things without seeing them for the depressing and difficult things that they are. There's no really positive way to talk about end-of-life conversations. It's hard, it hurts, it's depressing. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have some things that cheer you up. So I've got a small, very cheesy gift I'm going to post in the Microsoft Teams chat soon, so you can look forward to that. I hope you're all doing okay. If you need anything or have any questions about the course or the content of any of the lectures, shoot me an email. See you later.